We all have to remember who we are, whose we are, and who we are called to serve. And for me, I keep who I'm called to serve at the forefront of every decision that I make. And sometimes that means saying a thing that I know may get me disinvited from a space, but I'm okay doing that if my being disinvited from the space is actually going to make that space better for other people behind me.
Today's guest is Carmita Semaan, founder and CEO of Surge Institute, which is committed to developing and elevating leaders of color. Prior to founding Surge, Carmita was an engineer and strategist for multiple Fortune 500 companies. She is the recipient of the 2020 Advancing Equity Award from Innovation for Equity and Chicago Business Journal's 2016 Women of Influence Award. And now, here are your hosts, Mildred Otero and Taylor Stewart.
Hello, and welcome to the Leaders Table. We're not here to talk titles or CVs. We are here to explore the moments that help to shape a leader. As many of you know, it is those raw, real experiences that don't always make it into the spotlight. I'm Mildred Otero, president of Lee.
And I'm Taylor Stewart, vice president of platforms at Lee. Mildred, I am really looking forward to today's conversation.
I am too. I'm so excited to welcome Carmita Semaan, the founder and CEO of Surge Institute. She has been an amazing and remarkable leader that I have been following for a very long time, and I'm so excited that she's here with us today. Welcome, Carmita.
Hi, Mildred. Hi, Taylor. Thank you all so much for having me and the invitation to be a part of a raw, honest, candid conversation is one that I welcome. So excited to dive in.
Let's start at the beginning. Carmita, I'd love to hear a little bit about where are you from? What's the place, the experience that has shaped who you are?
Well, as Mildred can tell you, anyone who has known me for more than 5 minutes knows that I am from Birmingham, Alabama. I am extremely proud of being a daughter of the South. You know, I'm one generation removed from the civil rights movement to watch what other people see as grainy black and white videos of Bull Connor's dogs and the horrendous acts of 1963 and 16th Street Baptist Church. I see myself, and particularly I know as it pertains to this conversation, we're talking about leadership and all of that. Like, I'm who I am because I am a Black girl child from Birmingham, Alabama. That place shaped me, raised me, and everything I know and believe about myself and others is because of Birmingham.
I'm curious, obviously a lot of folks will know you from your work at Surge and so many other places that you have been on in your professional journey. What other roles or identities would you say shape your leadership?
Obviously, I wear the title of CEO, of founder, but that says so little about who I am. So people who really know me know that's the title I lead with the least. I'm also the only child of an amazing, badass woman who was disabled. And I've come to recognize, particularly over the past 10, 15 years of my life, that what it means to be a child who also has to wear the role of caretaker in some ways has shaped me more than any business school degree or anything else. My parents got divorced when I was very young, so it was just my mom and I in terms of our nuclear family, but I'm also the product of a really loud, loving, amazing Southern family,
I love
which shapes how I think and how I define connection and love, which for me, leadership is all about love and how you think about and see people. And when I think of my origin story that stand out the most, right now, I'm a mother, I'm a partner, a wife, and my daughter is 4 going on 44. So what that often means is like, I am being mothered as I'm mothering. So that's a
Right.
title that I'm learning to wear, sometimes begrudgingly, but those are the titles that shape who I am today.
Thank you for bringing all of those titles into the space today and into this conversation. I'd love to know what's a surprising title or a surprising something that folks may not know about you.
I I don't think that this is surprising, but I guess I don't fit into a lot of the molds of what people think about me. So I'm a chemical engineer with an MBA. I have an encyclopedic knowledge of hip hop. I love music. I'm also a real nerd. Like, I read graphic novels. I know lots about comics. I inherited over 2,000 vinyl albums of classic jazz from my grandfather that I've added to over the years. So, I'm a lot of things.
I love that, Carmita, especially because even someone like myself has known you. I'm like, oh, wow, that is a lot of new and different sides to Carmita. So I love that. I'm just curious, as you think about your leadership style, is there a moment or a story in your life that when you look back reveals your approach to leadership?
So I've been doing a lot of thinking about my origins. I'm preparing to go on a 4.5 month sabbatical in just a couple of weeks. And people keep asking me, what are you going to do? And I think they're surprised when instead of a project, I say that my aim is to just listen to God. Because I think that in this moment, I'm being called to a moment of stillness. But to get back to your question, the reason that I shared that is because I have been very actively practicing stillness and listening in preparation for the sabbatical. And one of the things that recently came to me was a memory from my early career. I was in corporate America. This was before I made the transition into social impact and nonprofit work and education. And I was working for this global company. We'll leave the names off of it. I had a big, important role. I was product manager, flying all around the world, global responsibility. And I was, not surprisingly, one of very few women in senior leadership, and the only Black woman, only person of color, actually, at this company. And there were just lots of implicit things that I would notice. And this is as a 27-year-old, 27, 28-year-old. I remember that in that space, I made a decision, like, as a tiny example. There was no mention of Martin Luther King Day at all at this company. It was like it didn't exist.
Mm,
So I made this decision that I was going to have a subtle sort of acknowledgement. So I started wearing a pin on my lapel every day that celebrated some Black figure. It was one day it might be Ella Baker, one day it was Malcolm X, one day it was James, a statement about it. I just had it on my clothes. And then, fast forward a few months later, something really egregious happened to me. So there was someone who worked in the company who said some really racist remarks, said it in front of a lot of other people in the company. And of course, there was disaster control started to happen. So
wow. Yeah.
the president and CEO of the company called me in. And again, I'm 27 and I just thought about
Right.
this. They called me in and I now know they were doing the whole, like, let's make sure that we pacify her so that she doesn't sue. And they were saying, here's how we plan on disciplining this person. Do you want us to do anything more? And I said, at 27, you're asking me the wrong questions. Like, what you do to this one racist man is kind of beside the point. Like, what you should be asking yourself is what conditions and culture you've created as an organization that embolden him to say these things to me publicly and face no reprimand from any of the peers that were there. And the reason I share that is because I had this moment, Mildred and Taylor, where I was like, oh, I've been like this. Where
Mm,
at 27, maybe it was out of naivete, maybe it was Birmingham, Alabama, but I thought, like, I have to say something. And this isn't about winning this small thing. It's about
Mhm.
recognizing that this is so much bigger. At that time, I said, like, whether you fire him, reprimand him, I actually don't care. I'm not worried about one racist individual. I'm worried about the system that actually emboldens and enables this behavior with no negative consequence attached to it. And I elevate that because I think, and Mildred, you've seen me out in the wild. Like, I think lots of people probably assume that I have gotten to a place of success or comfort that enables me to push certain buttons or envelopes or say the thing, as we often say. And I realized that there's been a bit of that in me in my leadership from the very start. And whether it was in implicit or very explicit ways, I have always, I think, struck the balance of being bold and speaking truth, even if I knew that there were negative consequences potentially associated with that. And that hasn't always worked in my favor, but I have rarely, if ever, regretted it when it was the truth.
I want to follow up on that because it's such a powerful example. Can you, Carmita, just connect that to the Carmita of today that is leading her own organization? What did that teach you that helps you as a leader today?
Well, I mean, I feel a deep responsibility to the people that I care for. And I'm using those words intentionally because it's not just the people I lead. Like I feel a deep responsibility. I often say internally in my organization, we all have to remember who we are, whose we are, and who we are called to serve. And for me, I keep who I'm called to serve at the forefront of every decision that I make. And sometimes that means saying a thing that I know may get me disinvited from a space, but I'm okay doing that if my being disinvited from the space is actually going to make that space better for other people behind me. Like, that's just how I lead. I started with Birmingham. It's been over 15 minutes and I haven't mentioned my mom. I can't believe that. But the reason that I call her into the space is like, she would always say to me, it's not about you. It's not about you. And as a kid, as a teenager, I hated it. I was like, ugh, like, just stop saying that. What do you mean? And I now realize that before I even knew what to call it, I knew I had a responsibility that was bigger than me and my own success. And that is why I do what I do. Like, I am a fairly reluctant entrepreneur, but I started an organization because I saw a problem that was deeply impacting a system that was about amplifying and elevating the brilliance and genius of folks of color. And like, I could have been doing lots of other things that were about helping me and my family, but my decision to start this organization and start this work was because I was deeply invested and called to serve and support people whose faces and names I may never know. So I think, that to bridge the gap between that story, it was like recognizing even at 27, like, I was saying something that could probably get me fired. It didn't get me fired. I
Mhm.
ended up leaving, but I was
Mm.
willing to do that because I was trying to lay a foundation for something that would help others whose names I may never know. And I think that's the core of the leadership that I've brought to the movement that has become Surge. And it's what I hope. I'm sure we'll get to this, but it's when I think of legacy, that's what that's all about. It's whether somebody knows my name or not, I don't care, but I hope that the decisions that I've made and the foundation that I've laid allows others to live in their brilliance, and, not have it somewhat easier, or at least not have to fight the same fights in the future.
Carmita, service has come up a few times in the ways that you describe your leadership. And at Lee, we think about public service expansively, not just a particular career in government, but all of the ways that people can be in this public space. I'd love to know, how do you think about public service? And if you had a chance, what's one piece of advice you'd give for someone who is just starting out on a journey in public service?
I absolutely think expansively about impact. Like I go back I graduated from, I got my MBA from Kellogg at Northwestern. And every year for the past, I don't know, probably 8, 10 years, they've asked me to come back and speak to the incoming students that are interested in social impact. It's been a beautiful thing to see how the number of business school students who are interested in social impact has grown from the time that I started doing this to, if there's 600 students, I think when I started, maybe 50 students would come early for the social impact thing. And now it's more like 200 to 300, which I think says something about where we are in the world and how people see themselves as global citizens, whether they choose to go be investment bankers or consultants. There's still this understanding that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. So I choose to do that because I believe that we all can have impact no matter what our vocation is, our chosen vocation. As I mentioned, I started in corporate. In every single place where I worked, I always did something on the side to sort of feed what I thought was my divine call for service. So whether it was starting a tutoring program at a local high school, rallying the engineers. This when I worked at Procter & Gamble, I rallied particularly the Black engineers there to serve as tutors at a local high school to support students in math and science testing. So I was always doing these things in cities. And I finally did decide, obviously 20 years ago or so, to make the call, what I would say my divine call, my life's work, or align with my vocation. But I don't think that's the story for everyone. Like, I really believe that there is a way to have impact that has to be aligned with your gifts, your skills, and your call. I don't want to get too woo-woo on here, but I do believe that we all have a purpose. There's this framework, Japanese word ikigai, that talks about purpose sitting at the center of what you love, what you do well, what the world needs, and what can sustain you financially. And I think everyone has to find that for themselves. And I don't believe there is one right answer there. And I've been pretty expansive, even in our work at Surge. We support Black and Brown AAPI leaders who are working in education. But that doesn't just mean systems of education. That means, people can be youth serving in nonprofit organizations, but also in juvenile justice, also in research roles or philanthropy. So I think it's important for us all to think really expansively about how we serve from where we are and how we do that in a way that is aligned with our gifts, our skills, and the ways in which we're called to have an impact.
Oh my gosh, Carmita, that resonates so much. I want to shift a little. One of the questions that I really, I don't want to say enjoy, but I think important to ask our leaders, our most senior leaders that come into the space. I think especially as we try to inspire the next generation of leaders, is around failure. Failure is a tough teacher. It's an important teacher nonetheless. Can you just share a time where failure shaped you and maybe something you might not have learned in any other way?
Oh my. We could be here all day talking about failures. But professionally, there are so many. The one that I'll speak to, and this is a story that I share often when I'm sharing my leadership story, particularly with younger professionals, I always warn them that if people are telling you their leadership story and they don't talk about the failures, run, because the line is never just up and to the right. There's the Churchill quote that, failure is not fatal. And it's what you do after that that counts. I had my first nonprofit CEO role at 34. And if you had asked me at the time, I'd done lots of things, had a pretty solid reputation for success, getting results, all the things. And I had this opportunity to lead a national nonprofit in my early 30s. And I was so excited and I made it make all the sense in the world. And the truth of the matter is, I never should have taken that job. I never should have taken that job for lots of different reasons. And at the time, I would have said lots of things about what wasn't right about the organization, and I would have made it about them and the board. And not that some of that wasn't true, but the truth of the matter is, and the lesson for me is that I let my ego take me to a place where my values could not sustain me. And I would not have admitted in that time that the reason that I was taking that job is because I wanted to be a CEO, to make that amount of money and blah, 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 like all these things. But if I had been making a decision that was aligned with who I am and my values, I would have asked very different questions during those conversations with the board. And there are things that I didn't do because I was enamored with the role. I would never have admitted that. But now I can look back and say there was a level of ego that I had to shed, and belief in my worth beyond title, beyond what I produced. And I did not do well in that job. I did well by the people. That's one thing that will always be consistent in my leadership. There are people who worked for me at that organization that if I called today and said, hey, would you come follow me? They would, which I think is beautiful. But in terms of executing against the outcomes and objectives that were required of me as a CEO, there were things that I wasn't prepared to do. And it had nothing to do with my age. So this isn't about I hadn't lived enough to do the job well. It just wasn't my job. It wasn't the job that I was supposed to have. But I didn't ask the right questions to assess that because my ego was leading me toward a path. So that is a failure moment that I speak of very differently now than if you had asked me a year or 2 years out of that role. I would have talked about all the things that weren't right about the board and, like all kinds of other things. And the truth of the matter is, even if all of that were true, which most of it is, I wouldn't have taken the job if I had been driven and making decisions based on my values and the impact that I wanted to have. So that's a strong lesson that I encourage particularly younger professionals, because, we're all in places where we are being driven by, the insecure overachiever inside of us that says, just do more, get the better title, get the better.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't want to project on other people. It was the insecure overachiever inside of me that was driven by things that were not, frankly, my own scorecard. Like I was trying to live a life that was driven by someone else's idea of success. And the truth of the matter is, the more I've leaned into really understanding my call, my skills, and frankly, what brings me joy and the problems that I want to solve, my success has been unlimited and skyrocketed because I would say, started to shun those aspects of external validation and instead seek something deeper. Whatever, for me, I'm a very faith-driven person. I'm sure that's obvious just even in the language that I use, but whatever that is for other people, I think tapping into that internal intrinsic motivation and validation is the real breakthrough. And I wouldn't have learned that, I don't think, without failure.
Thank you, Carmita. And I want you to know that it's something that I say often, is that shift from external validation to an internal validation is so important for a leader, especially as you're sort of shifting to bigger decisions in your own leadership as you move forward and progress. So I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. I want to continue in this thread around decision making. we always want to give our listeners, our members, a sort of behind the scenes to a lot of the leadership that they see. What are some, I don't know, I would say people, practices, voices that you kind of rely on to help guide you when you are making decisions and when that path isn't clear? Oftentimes, by the time certain decisions arrive at a leader's desk, it's because someone else didn't have the clarity, right? Like, it's usually we're getting the least clear options and we have to sort of still make a decision.
As I mentioned earlier, I'm a person of deep faith. So I absolutely get still. And I am a person, whether that for me is through prayer, meditation. I'm a person of deep faith who also practices yoga because that's where I still my
Oh.
brain. Like I get very,
Mhm.
very still. I also do float therapy. Float therapy is another place where, the way that I do it, it is, complete sensory deprivation. And, the 10-year-old me wanted to be an astronaut. So I think this is my way of, of going into space. There's something about like placing yourself physically in a space that forces your mind to be still. And for me, that is either in prayer, in yoga, or in float therapy. For me, in stillness, there often is a knowing. I believe that knowing comes from a multitude of places. Like that knowing is for me a deep spiritual one, but it's also a reminder of the lessons that you have heard. Like I hear my mom's voice in some of those times
Mm.
of stillness, of reminding me who I am and whose I am, and like those lessons that I learned from her. I unfortunately lost my mother as a 23, about to be 24-year-old. But 6 years before I lost her, I lost, one of the most important people in my life was my uncle, my mom's older brother. And the reason I bring him up is because I grew up in a single parent household. My mom's older brother was like my dad. My dad lived in Florida. We lived in Alabama. My dad wasn't the one who was there for all my performances. And, I was a
All the
mathlete.
moments.
My uncle was that person. He was a Black gay man, in Birmingham, Alabama, the Bible Belt. He was
Mm.
very well known in the city. And there's so many things that I learned from watching him walk through the world, because my mom and I lived well below the poverty line. My uncle helped out in so many ways, which meant, I went to live with him for extended periods when my mom was having a hard time and her health was impacted. And I remember one of the lessons from watching him is not worrying about being understood,
Mm.
not seeking to always be understood. And the reason I bring that up is like a leadership lesson is sometimes in those moments of stillness, he is the first voice that I hear. And he never talked to me about being same gender loving. He just was. There wasn't
Mhm.
conversations about it. I remember listening to vinyl albums in his house, and we listened to everything from, Brahms and Beethoven to Sarah Vaughan and Prince controversy. And there was a lesson from him about just being in all of your splendor and recognizing that that's not always going to be understood. That I lean into a lot as a leader, because there are oftentimes that we have to make decisions. Maybe because we have information that other people don't have. Maybe it's because we have context that others don't. And maybe it's because our gut is telling us something that other people just aren't going to get. And sometimes that's the voice that I lean into, because, ultimately it's like I can live with making the bad call, but I can't live with making a decision out of fear or because I'm afraid of what people will think of me or how they will define me. I can't live with making that decision and it being the wrong one. So that's a lengthy answer
No,
answer
I
to
loved
your
it.
very
Mhm.
short
I got
question, but
goosebumps as you were talking. This is beautiful.
yeah,
Mhm.
as I said, I'm thinking about stillness. I'm thinking about my origin story and all of these things going into sabbatical. And one of the things that I'm doing on my sabbatical is taking a solo road trip through Alabama. My mother's birthday is in January, and I haven't spent her birthday in my place of origin since she passed. And there is something to me about, if there's the Sankofa of going backwards to go forwards. And I really think in this moment, I'm being called to lean into ancestral wisdom. And I think in moments, yeah, like the ones that we find ourselves in right now, the answers are often behind us to guide us forward. So that's where I'm leaning in this moment. That answer might have been very different, 3 years ago, but right now, that's where my head is.
I really appreciate that one. And that kind of takes me to the last question. You've been going with it throughout this interview, but it is about that legacy sort of moment and the being able to go backwards. So, Carmita, what do you hope people will remember about your leadership?
I get a little uncomfortable talking about legacy, and people talk about that a lot. And I think it's because it can get dangerously close to an ego-driven conversation. My legacy isn't mine to define. And I think if you think too much about legacy, you will start making decisions that are not of the moment, but are instead about what you want people to think about you. That rarely leads to the kind of impact that at least the people that I think of as, my ancestral, the people I aspire towards. I think about two things in response to that question. One, I believe that one of my superpowers is to be a mirror for others. And that through me, in whatever way, through my example, what I model, or through what I reflect back to others, they are able to see themselves more clearly. That is one thing that I hope people remember. If they don't remember my name, if they don't remember like what organization I led or what moment they met me in, I hope that what they remember is that through some interaction with me or something that I, was connected to, that they were able to see themselves more clearly and see the unique gifts and brilliance that they have, and that they were, in seeing that more clearly, better prepared to have the impact that only they can have. This gets back to my mama, and it ain't about you. It ain't about you. It's always about something bigger. And so I hope that people see or remember that mirroring to help have impact that lives much longer than you ever could. And then, ultimately, there is so much about my story and my journey that if you look at my demographics, if you look at that little Black girl child in the projects of Birmingham, Alabama, they would not have written this story as my destiny. And I think in many ways, like what I hope particularly little girls see when they see me is that no one else defines your destiny. Your zip code doesn't, your parents' education doesn't, your free and reduced lunch status doesn't, your like whatever, like what, fill in the blank of all the isms. I say that as a person that believes wholeheartedly I'm not who I am despite my background. I am who I am because of it. And it's why I speak with pride, not shame, about every aspect of my childhood, my leadership journey. And I hope that that becomes a model for others who, whether they acknowledge it or not, do wear some cloak of shame or limiting beliefs or whatever, based on their story of origin. And my hope is that by modeling a different way of being and leading, I create the space for others to do the same.
Thank you, Carmita. It is these vulnerable and honest conversations that just mean so much to us. Thank you for being so open and sharing your story with us today. I just think it's going to resonate with so many people listening.
We just really appreciate you, Carmita, because it's conversations like these that remind us what leadership really is. It's complex, it's imperfect, and it's human. To everyone tuning in, thank you for spending this time with us. Remember, leadership is as much about the questions as the answers. So take care until next time.
Thank you for listening to The Leaders Table. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information about Lee, you can visit us online at wearelee.org.